Okay, so this is the app that we're going to be starting with. I sent out some instructions for if you wanted to code along to clone it before class. You could try, if you didn't do it before class, you could try quickly getting it up and running based on those emailed instructions right now. It's sitting here as a repo up on GitHub. And yeah, after I'll do the work that I'm going to do right now within a few branches, and then I'll push those branches up to the repo so you can see the work there. And I'm starting in the master branch, and what the master branch has, we can just quickly review this app and sort of what it looks like. It's a very simple application. If we look at the schema, we have some active storage stuff for image storage, and really just one table for products. And a product has a name, product has a description, and a product has its price in as an integer. So price in whole number of cents. That's how when we bring in some credit card processing through Stripe, Stripe is expecting to see your price in whole number of cents, because there's no such thing in sort of commercial math as fractional cents. So if you're doing like sort of fintech kind of stuff, you might have to deal with fractional cents, but in sort of e-commerce kind of places, you don't go down to a fractional cent. So we're going to be using whole number integers. If your application doesn't store its prices in whole number integers, you can just convert it to that when you send the price to Stripe. You can just multiply by 100 and then turn it into an integer. Okay, so that's the look of the schema. Along with that, we have a single product model. It's got a few validations on it. It's got an image attachment by way of active storage. This was just me playing around with something. That image URL is not important. And then currently it has a single controller that just has an index, and it's just loading up all the products into an instance variable. And if we go to the associated view, we can see that we are looping through those products, displaying the name. If an image is present, displaying the image, displaying the price. And here we have to convert it back into something that looks more like humans are going to expect a price to look like. So I take my whole number of cents, divide it by 100. I divided by 100.0 because I wanted to become a float. And that's just like a little Ruby trick, because if I divided it just straight up by 100, it would stay in integer math and it would round away the cents. So I take my integer number, divide it by floating point 100, and then I pass it to Rails's number to currency helper that puts a $sign on the front of it, and it pads any zeros that might need to be padded at the end of the number. So if the number was like $4.50, if we didn't use number to currency, it would display as 4.5. But we're not used to seeing $4.50 represented as 4.5. So number to currency puts in that extra padded zero for us. And all of this data was seeded into the application by way of Faker, but I also used the Unsplash website, which is just a source of really nice, free to use photography. And they have a simple API that you can pass a search query to. So for each of the faked products, I requested to download that product. And then I handed it off to Active Storage, and Active Storage like slurped that in, saved it to my system, and that got me the images into my application. So that's what we're working with. That's what gives us this. What I would like to do is I would like there to be a link or a button for each one of these things so that I could add to cart. I'm going to build a simplistic cart, one that does not concern itself with quantities. So it's simply going to be the products in the cart or it's not in the cart. And it's going to be up to you if you want to implement the cart on your project to add the ability to deal with quantities. if you Google around, or if you go on YouTube and you find like Rails shopping cart tutorials, they are probably more effort than you need to put in compared to what you need to do to get the baseline marks for the project. So by all means, if you want to do a really fancy shopping cart, you can follow a tutorial that you find online. Mine is going to be simplified in that I'm not using the database at all. My cart's entirely in session. And so the deficiency there is if this was a real store, the user's cart would not follow them between devices or anything like that. It'll just simply be stored, attached to a cookie in their browser. So it's not the ideal cart, but it's sort of a simplified version of a cart that will get us the marks from the project. And so we're going to work with session. Once I get that worked in, we'll talk about credit card processing, but we'll start off just working with session. So I'm going to go to my command line, and I'm going to create a branch called session cart. So I'm going to git checkout -b for give me a new branch. Puts me into a new branch. And as I said, I want a little button there. But I'm going to start with what I consider to be like the hello world of using session, which is just like a visit counter. So that will give us an idea of how session works in Rails and show that we can attach some information to a particular user by way of their browser, by way of a cookie, because that's really what session is tied to in Rails. It'll work in a similar way to what you're used to when you worked with session back in PHP, but there are some slight differences, and I'll go over those when we hit them. So what I would like to do is I'm going to bring up the one view that we have. And at the top of that view, I'm just going to say, you have visited this site n times. But I want that n to actually be a number, and I want that number to go up over time. And so what I would really like it to be would be to like echo in some number. I also would like to properly pluralize the word time depending on what that number is. So I'll use Rails's pluralize helper. I'm going to pluralize some kind of visit count. That variable does not yet exist. And I'm going to pluralize the word time so that if visit count is 1, it'll say 1 time. If it's 2 or greater, it'll say 2 times, 3 times, that kind of thing. So if I went to go display this, it wouldn't work yet. I need to go into the associated controller. So I'll type like con prod ducks. There's the associated controller, and I'm going to set up a visit count. Initially, just hard coding it to the number 1. So we've got visit count in our controller, and then over here we are displaying that visit count and pluralizing it with time. You have visited the site 1 time. So the pluralization works, nothing else is working yet, right? I could refresh this forever, nothing would change. Session in Rails is just a hash called session. I don't have to initialize it in any way. So if you remember back to PHP, we had to sort of start session up. And when you started session up, it would inject a cookie uniquely identifying you in your browser. And then the session data in PHP would actually be saved on the server in a flat file. The way it works in Rails is it still makes use of cookies, but it actually stores the session data in the cookie itself. So PHP just stored like an identifier, a unique identifier in the cookie. With Rails, it stores the data itself in the cookie. it makes that data tamper-proof, so you can't just open the cookie and alter the data, because it does some cryptographic signing of that data, so that if you tried to alter it, Rails would be able to detect that alteration. So I'm going to have session count, or session a position visit count, and the very first time someone visits the site, we have to initialize visit count, and then after that we want to increment it. And so there is a nice operator in both Ruby and JavaScript, which is the or equals operator. And the or equals operator will assign a variable, or in this case a hash value. It will assign it only if it doesn't already have a value. And so the very first time our users come to our site, visits count is going to be set to 0, and after that it won't be affected by this line anymore. And then I'm going to grab that visit count and increment it by 1. So I'm going to say like session visit count plus equals 1. We don't have plus plus in Ruby, so we just use a plus equals 1. And then the visit count that I'm passing to the view will just be session visit count. So here, initialize the visit count on first visit. Increment the count with each visit. And that should be enough for our hello world of session. So I should be able to go over to my browser now, reload the page. It should still say 1 visit the first time, and then with each reload, that number should go up and up and up. So there's the 1, there's 2, 3, 4. Notice that cookies have this property that they're shared across the browser. So if I opened up a separate tab, I could go 5, 6, 7, 8, and I could go back over here, and it should go right up from 4 to 9, and it does. If I open up like a private window, so privacy mode in browsers have a separate cookie store, a disposable cookie store, and so this does not affect the other browser. So I can go up here to reload it a bunch of times to like 12 here, and that has no effect on this. This should just go straight to 10. So these are two separate independent tabs within a privacy browser do share cookies. And then if we went into a completely separate browser, well, that would have its own separate cookie store as well. If we want to look at this cookie, we can do so. I can hit Control-Shift-I to bring up my dev tools. I'm in Firefox, but there's something similar in Chrome. I don't exactly remember where to find it, but in Firefox, I go to my Storage tab, and there is a cookies section in there, and I can see for local host. So a cookie is always identified with the domain that set the cookie, and then the cookie gets a name, and you can see this is the one that we're working with right here. It's the name that my application was given when I did Rails new, and so I did Rails new and I said stripe it up, and so it's _ stripe it up _ session. And so if I deleted all of these cookies and I went back here, I should be back at 1. Back at 1, and then these cookies come back into action. Notice the cookie itself is this long, sort of unreadable thing. So it's going to be Rails that's going to deal with sort of being able to decode that. That's the sort of the cryptographically signed value. So like the number 1 is stored in there somewhere. doesn't really matter where Rails is going to handle that for us. Rails cookies are also set to HTTP only, which means they're not going to be shared with JavaScript on the page, and that's a security thing. You don't want JavaScript necessarily to be able to read cookies that are set by the server, because JavaScript could potentially be injected into the page through a cross-site scripting attack, and you would then not want that cross-site scripting attack to be able to get access to your cookies because of what's called cookie sidejacking, right? If someone has access to your cookies, they could potentially use those to impersonate you on a site, because cookies are usually used as an authorization or sort of an authentication mechanism. Once you've given a username and password, often a cookie is set on your site. The other thing you want to make sure of if you are using cookies for that kind of thing, for for authentication sessions, is that you are deployed on HTTPS, right? You want to have encryption enabled on your connection so that the cookies are not flying across the internet in plain text, again, so that they're not vulnerable to sidejacking attacks. Okay, it's fairly simple, but any initial questions about session in the context of Rails and its use of cookies? The one other caveat that just came to mind is that there is a maximum size for what can be stored in a browser cookie, and Rails, you can just store like anything in session, right? You can store like arrays of objects, like arrays of Rails objects in session, and you could eventually hit that maximum size and you'll get an error. And so just be cognizant of that. You want to keep what you're storing into session fairly small. Rails can also be configured to store, just like PHP, just a unique identifier in the cookie, and you can have the actual session data stored even in a database on server side if you needed a lot of data stored in there. But usually you don't need a lot. Okay, so I'm going to refactor my code a little in anticipation of my add to cart functionality, and also to make this a little bit more flexible in terms of this visit count. Right now it only works for a single action on the page. Like, what if we had multiple actions? So, or multiple views, I guess it would be. So if I go to my products and I add a file here, I just call it about.html.erb. So that's in my views products folder. And then I go into my routing file and I create like a get request to the about, should go to the products about. Say about us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that message you have visited sort of however many times, and I'm going to put it outside of a single view into the layout so that it should appear across the entire site, just like you would want like a shopping cart to appear across your entire site. You don't want it just to be limited to one of your actions. So I'm going to open up the layout here, the application layout, and I'm going to move this message here into the layout above the yield. And the yield is where the view is injected. So it should still work over here. But if I go to /about, it always just says 0. And so the reason for that is that the visit count instance variable is currently only available for my index. Now, I could sort of naively go and create a separate about action and like take these 3 lines and paste them into here and be like, done, right? Now the functionality should exist across the various pages, right? I can go back to the home page. But that's a little bit lame, right? We've got some repetition that we don't necessarily need in our application, and if we started to grow the number of pages on our site, we'd have to repeat that over and over and over. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, oh, I'm not going to copy it again. I'm going to create a private area inside of my class. So inside of controllers, all of our public methods are routable, things that we can route to with the routing system. Private methods aren't, they're just little helper methods. And what I want to do here is I'm going to create a initialize session method, and I'm going to create a increment visit count method. And into initialize session, I'm going to put that line, and into increment visit count, I'm going to put that line, or those lines. So same code, just redistributed across two helper methods, and then I'm going to remove that code from the actual actions. Currently, it won't be executed now at all. So I've sort of got my stuff in a broken state at this point in time. So if I save this code and I went back to my application, doesn't matter what page we're on, it's always saying 0. Rails has this thing called before filters, and it's a way of hooking into the life cycle of a controller and having the ability to hook in things like, oh, I would like to run initialize session and increment visit count before any of my actions. That would be nice. So I say at the top here, before action, initialize session, and before action, increment visit count. And now before any one of my actions in this particular controller, the session will be potentially initialized if it hasn't been already, and the visit count will go up, and then an instance variable will be created in every one of those actions called @visitCount. If I wanted this to work across an entire application that had multiple controllers, that's the time that we would bring the application controller into play, because that's the place, like, all controllers inherit from application controller, which in turn inherit from action controller base. So this is a place where we can put something that will be inherited across all of our controllers. So I won't go ahead and do that, but just know that that's a possibility. Okay, so that's the end of this this visit count. I'm also going to eventually be adding to this to do my add to cart, and so I only want this visit count to increment when we're visiting the index and the about page. So it's another modification that we can perform for these life cycle filters, is that, like, okay, we always want the session to be initialized everywhere, but we only want the visit count to be executed here and here. Okay, now let's make a simple shopping cart. I don't have a partial here, I'm just working directly inside of a loop in this index.html.erb, and below the product description in this view, I'm going to put a paragraph tag and a link to, I call it add to cart. And currently I'll just make it go nowhere. We could do this in multiple ways. Link to, by default, is going to build like your standard href kind of link. This functionality, though, has an effect on the state of the page, right? It's going to change session in some way. Anytime you are changing session in some way or the backend state of your server in some way, like your database, that should not be done by way of a GET request. GET requests are supposed to be cacheable. They're supposed to be idempotent, meaning you can run them over and over again and not have them have a cumulative effect. So we don't want to rely just on a regular old link for that to happen. We would need another verb. So we're going to use the post. It's okay for a post, an HTTP post, to affect the state of the application or the state of the server. It's not okay for a GET to do that. I don't know if browsers still do this, but for a while Chrome was actually trying to predict which links the user would click on next and load them up behind the scenes. And so Chrome was actually like going through and sort of like crawling sites that you were on, anticipating that you were going to go to a next page, and so that when you click the link, it was already preloaded, but it would only do things that were GET requests because it assumed that they were idempotent and cacheable. But if you had something like an add to cart functionality that was a GET request, Chrome could be going around and clicking and adding a whole bunch of stuff to cart for you. So I don't think it still has that functionality, but still, there's all sorts of caching proxies that exist on the internet, and even like things like Googlebot visit, so actively crawl GET requests. You just don't want any kind of action, permanent action, to occur on a GET request. So what does that leave us with? That means that we're going to create some routes here, and one of them is going to be a post route. I'm going to, just so that we can be very clear about it, I'm going to manually make these routes. I'm not going to use like a resources kind of command. I'm just going to manually make the routes. I'm going to say like a post request to slash add to cart, or maybe even products slash add to cart slash some ID should go to the products add to cart action, which hasn't been created yet. And I want that to be known as products add to cart, so that when I reference it as a path for something, for a form or a link, that I could say like products add to cart path. Or I could even simplify that and just call it add to cart path. And then I also want the ability to remove something from the cart. So I want to be able to go to product slash remove from cart, also with an ID. I want that to go to the products remove from cart. So that's going to use an HTTP delete. It's also going to provide an ID, which product should be removed from the cart. And then I'm going to say as remove from cart. That needs to be in quotes, both of those things. Okay, we're only going to work with this one initially, and then we'll bring in the delete functionality. And so I'm going to do that back over here. So where do I want this link to go to? I want it to go to the add to cart path. That is coming from this name right here. The fact that this is called add to cart means that I get an add to cart path to reference this route. So the link to is going to the add to cart path. The route needs an ID. So I need to provide the path with an ID or a thing that has an ID. And I have a thing that has an ID. I have the current product. By default, link to does GET requests. I want a post request. So I have to say that the method is post. So now on clicking this link, the browser should, by way of JavaScript, so Rails will change this link to use JavaScript to make a post request to the add to cart path and providing the ID in the URL. So this is the product or the ID of the product that we want to add to the cart. That means over here in my controller, I need an add to cart method. And I also need to add to this initialize session because I want to have a cart in my session, a shopping cart. So session at position cart, I'm going to use an or equals just like I did before, because the very first time the user visits, they won't have anything at that position. And we're just going to make it an empty array. And so that when we get to this add to cart, we're going to say session at position cart, and we're going to add to it. What are we going to add to it? Params at position ID. So the ID coming to us by way of the route. So this ID right here. That ends up in the params hash. So I ask for it, and I'm shoving it into the array with the shoving operator. Right? It looks like two hands shoving something into the array. And so after that happens, I just want to redirect back to my root path. And that gets around the problem of like, usually what happens when Rails gets to the end of an action is it tries to load up a view with the same name, right? It would go to the products, views products folder and look for an add to cart view. Well, we don't need an add to cart view. We don't need a special view. We just want to add that product to the cart, and then so we're just redirecting the user right back to where they were, which was the root path. You could change where they were depending on where they actually were. I think there's even some capability of doing this. I can't remember if that's the actual thing, but it just takes them back to where they were. There's something to do, something similar to that. All right. It's been a while since I tested anything. I've lost confidence that anything that I've done here is even going to work. So let's go test this out. I'm going to go here inside of my index view, and I just want to get an idea if this cart is working at all. I'm going to use the debug command to debug my session cart. So I'm just doing like an echo with the less than % equals. Debug is just like print R in PHP. It's going to print out like a human readable version of the thing that you give it. And then the thing that I'm giving it is the session cart. So let's go see if everything I did or nothing I did works. So if I visit, reload this page, start off with an empty cart, just like a set of square braces. That looks okay. For each one of these products, if I hover over the product, I can see down below it's going to /products, add to cart 3 for that one. And for this one, it's going to like products, add to cart 4. And this one, product, add to cart 5. So it looks like it's building the URLs correctly. And so I'm going to try clicking on one of these. So this is product number 3. So ID 3 should then end up inside of my cart here. And it does. And I can go to other things and I can add them and they go in there as well. There's a few problems. One, they're being added as strings. You can see that it has quotes around it. So that's problematic because they're IDs, which are supposed to be numeric. So I'm going to need to convert them into strings. The other thing that's problematic is that when I click add to cart multiple times for the same product, it's adding that product multiple times to my cart. So I have to fix a few things here. And I'm going to do it in the controller. One, I'm going to create an ID variable that is this params. So I'm going to take this params here, delete it, and paste it here. Oops. And then I'm going to 2i it to convert it from a string into an integer. That'll parse the string to an int. And then I'm going to add that ID to the cart unless the session cart includes the ID. And just as a little hack to clear my cart out, I'm going to load the page up once where I remove the or in front of the or equals. So just a little way of clearing out the cart. So I'm going to reload the page once to clear my cart out, put the ors back in, and now when I click add to cart, we should be able to convert the ID that's coming from the routing system into an integer, save it as ID, add that ID to the array unless the ID is already in the array, and in all cases redirect back to the root path. So let's see if that functions. Clicking add to cart here, I get the number 3 in there, click it again, doesn't go in there. Click another one, it does. You can access, we've seen here, that you can access the session directly inside of views. I don't tend to like to do that. I like to turn everything that I'm going to interact with inside of a view into an instance variable. So inside of here, I'm also going to create a load cart method, and it's simply going to create a cart from the session. Not really a requirement, and I'm going to add that up at the top to my actions here. So before action, load cart. The reason I wanted the cart loaded into an instance variable is so that inside of my view here, like maybe I only display add to cart if it's not already in my cart. And so I could have something like if cart dot include question mark product dot ID. Oh, better yet, not even. Let's do this. Let's make this add to cart even better. Instead of just loading the session up, let's actually load up all the products from the model. So let's do something like product dot find. When you give find a single number, it gives you back a single product. If you give find an array of numbers, it gives you back an array of objects of that type. And so now my cart will include all of the products that are loaded up in that cart. And so over here, I can just say like, is this product included in the cart? If it's already included in the cart, this would say like, product is in your cart. Else, I can add it. Let me test that out. Product is in your cart. Product is in your cart. My ergonomic iron knife is not in my cart yet, so I will click it. And now it is in my cart. Okay, the last thing I would like to do in terms of cart is maybe display the cart somewhere on the page, and also what? I guess remove items from said cart. So I can get rid of this debugging here. What do I want to display? Oh yeah, there's that cool HTML native accordion. What is that thing? Details. Have you ever used the details element? It's a really cool thing. The details element does like a native HTML accordion, meaning like it'll like reveal information and hide it based on a click without needing any JavaScript or anything like that. So we can put our cart inside of that. So here I'm going to put details. Is it details? Yeah. Details, and then summary is what you want the clickable thing to be. So let's call it shopping cart. And then below it, I will put the cart itself inside of an unordered list. And I will say at cart.eachDo product. Yours. And then li product.name li. I'll come back to my code. I just want to make sure that this is going to do the thing that I'm thinking it might do. There's the shopping cart. I can click it, and it reveals the cart. Isn't that a nifty HTML element? I just found out about that one, and I was so excited. Yeah. No JavaScript needed. What a lovely life. And then here I could have like remove from cart functionality as well, right? So that's maybe beside each one of these things I would say remove from cart. I'll go back and show you that code though. There it is. So there's the detail, the summary at the top, and then the hideable stuff inside of it. Anyone need to see any of my code across either the views or the controllers or anything? You're good? Let's go and implement remove from cart functionality then. I could even have that here as well, right? So if the product's in the cart, I could have a remove to cart. I'm going to implement it in a slightly different way. I'm going to use a button just to show that there's two ways of doing this. I could have also used a button for the add to cart functionality as well. Rails has link to for building links, and those links can be augmented to do different kinds of methods. What button to does is it builds like a little form for you, and you can have hidden data associated with that form, and you can also have that form submit using different methods. And so I'm going to use button to here, and I'm going to say remove from cart. And I built a route for it already. It's my remove from cart route, and that's going to go to my yet to be created remove from cart action, and it needs an ID. So I say remove from cart. The method needs to be delete, and I've got some params. Specifically, I've got, oh yeah, how do I do this? Is it like this? We'll try that out and see. Button to, the text on the button, the This is add to cart path, the method, and then the params that I want, and I gotta close that up. It's different because of its button 2. So when you use button 2, you use params, and it's going to actually, in my form that it's going to make for me, it's going to put a hidden input in the form that has that ID stashed away in it, I think. Let's see if I remember how to use button 2. Oh, no route matches, removed from cart, missing keys. Oh, okay, so maybe I do have to do it the same way. It might need this. And then I should be able to get rid of this params then. Yeah, so if I wanted to use the params, I could have created the route without the ID in it and passed it by way of a parameter. In this case, I'm just passing it by way of the URL. Go back over here. There you are. So the things that have been added to the cart have a removed cart from cart button. If we view source on that, we'll see that it's a form that's creating that. The form is going to those particular products removed from cart 4 or 3. It's got some hidden stuff inside of it to say that this should really be like a delete method, and it's got a submit button that has our value in it. So now I need to actually go ahead and implement in the controller the thing that's going to deal with that. I'm also going to take this thing right here, and I will put it up into my cart as well. So like this whole thing can be copied and pasted up here. I think that should still work. So inside of my shopping cart. Yeah, in the shopping cart, the button 2 looks ugly. Let's make it a link inside of there. Yeah, put a dash. There you go. So it's a button down below, but here in the shopping cart, it's just a link that says remove from cart. It's because I changed from button 2 to link 2 when I put it up there. Everything else is the same. It's still got the same path, passing in the product, and the same method override. And now I need a remove from cart action inside of my controller. And here I'm just going to go to my session cart, and I'm going to delete the params. No, I'm going to go do what I did up here. Grab it as an ID and turn it into an integer, and then delete it. Can't remember if delete is destructive. I'm thinking it would need an exclamation mark to be destructive. If it'll actually affect my cart, we'll see in a moment if I'm gonna need to like put an exclamation mark or save it over the existing cart. Regardless, I need to still redirect to the root path after deleting it. Let me test this out. Trying to remove the rustic bronze chair. Click, and it's gone. And then the ergonomic knife, and it's gone. Remove that. And then my shopping cart has nothing in it. It should probably say as much, right? So there should maybe be some like if cart.empty, no items in cart. Else end. And then like that. back over here. Shopping cart is empty. There's no items in it. And when I add an item to it, I've got an item in it. There we are. Anyone need to see any aspect of my code at this point? Yeah. The controller, yeah. Same for you, or?
No, I just wanted to see, were you able to delete it from the actual item list? Like the remove from cart button?
The actual item list, what do you mean by that?
Or the unordered list on your page?
Yeah, it should remove from the list.
Okay. For me, I get it.
You good? Or oh, the before actions. There you are. So I've got 3 of them right now. And what are you having an issue with?
It's not removing properly when I do it from the unordered list.
Oh, like from here.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see, because I don't know if I've tested that. So this one's not working properly? Let's see. It seems to be for me. What do you need to see? Do you have the same?
Probably index. I think I have everything the same one.
Okay, let's see the index here. The button 2 looks like this. So it's got the remove the cart path. We're passing in the product. The method is being override with the symbol delete. Yeah. Oh yeah, but before save is a similar thing, but it's part of the model lifecycle method. So you can like hook things into your model to trigger before the model saves. So it's the same idea, giving you the ability to like inject something into the Rails lifecycle as a hook, but it operates at the model level, whereas before action operates at the controller level. Okay, let's take a break. We're done the add to cart functionality. We'll take like 10-minute break, and then we'll return and we'll talk a little bit about credit card processing with the Stripe API. So I'll